Hi, and welcome to the Digital Digging YouTube channel and episode 4 of Digital Worlds. In this video I wanted to talk about how a couple of years ago I pulled together a small focus group of educators, one historian, one business studies and one IT, and wanted them to hear some proposals for the inclusion of digital technologies in the classroom. I had some ideas about using some freely available tools that both the teachers and pupils could benefit from using, and I wanted to see what the early reaction would be and to see if the idea was likely to be picked up or would wither on the vine. The pitch was this. I pictured for them an imaginary school, a school which had recently expanded and built a new science block. An archaeological team was called in to assess the ground before construction had begun, and the post holes and foundations of a medieval hall had been discovered and excavated. The archaeologists had then conducted a wider geophysical survey across the rest of the sports field, and lo and behold, there was a previously unknown deserted medieval village there too. The layout of the streets, houses, forge, the lot. The school was excited, and being a progressive kind of place, they commissioned an artist to create a paint and canvas interpretation of how it might have looked, and also had the excavation plan blown up, laminated, and stuck on the wall. But then I wanted to show them what could have happened instead. For the next stage, I played them a video I had put together earlier in the day explaining various points as they played out across the screen. It began with a plan of the deserted medieval village, or DMV, from here on in. We zoomed out a little to reveal that the plan was an overlay in Google Earth, placed and scaled exactly so it occupied the same area as the original excavation and, of course, the original medieval village. Next, the plan and topography were imported to SketchUp, and we whizzed through the reconstruction of a village. I'd actually just downloaded a handful of pre-built medieval-looking houses from the Google 3D warehouse, rescaled them and planted them all over areas which matched their footprint more or less. This was an experiment after all, and I didn't want to spend a fortnight building a perfect village. Once this was done, the village was uploaded back into Google Earth, and various slow rotation, zooming camera work impressed upon them that this was a good thing. So what exactly was I demonstrating? Well, at that point in the pitch I was demonstrating that reasonable digital reconstructions could be had for zero expenditure in cash but a little investment in learning time. They all agreed that it looked good, that there were some interesting ideas in there which could be passed on to the kids, but the general feeling was that the expenditure of time and energy put into learning how to reconstruct a DMV didn't really have a payoff in the context of an educational environment. The IT guy could see how it would be a good way to get them interested in a project involving CAD programs, and the history teacher thought it would be a good way to explore the medieval through having his kids work out what building materials would be needed and what was available at the time. The business teacher thought it looked pretty good but wasn't really sure how it could be applied to what she taught. Which brings us to medieval business models. So we're now going to head off into the realms of fiction, but using only modifications of digital technology available today. It's only fiction in that all the ideas have yet to be assembled in one place. They already exist in other systems, so many of the working examples of interactions and in-game systems are based on the World of Warcraft model. I won't go into the game in too much detail, but the basic premise is as follows. You start by creating a character for yourself. Early decisions consist of what race you're going to be, human, elf, and so on, and then what class you're going to be, hunter, warrior, and so on. These are fairly important decisions because unlike other attributes you attach to your character later, these remain constant and you can't change your mind, although perhaps if you pay some money you might be able to. Then according to whichever race you choose, you get set down in a faux medieval world with nothing much but some very basic clothes and not much skill in your chosen class. The aim of the game is to level up so you can better equip yourself to deal with the immediate environment, and the best way to do that is to upgrade your ability to protect yourself from damage and improve your ability to inflict it on others. When you strip it down to this level, it sounds a little aggressive and pointless. It may help to keep in mind that our own biological imperative to survive long enough to reproduce also sounds somewhat lacking in depth. I like to think it's how we go about achieving these goals that provides us the interesting, fun and worthwhile side of the equation. So just a little more about WoW before we get to the point. Your progression through the world is driven by a quest system. In-game characters give you quests, the point of which is to drive you further into the game while providing you with enough rewards and leveling points to ensure that you don't get out of your depth too quickly. Following these quests will lead you to being introduced to a series of settlements, each significantly larger and more socially complex than the last. A village may contain a blacksmith and an inn, which will provide you with armour and a safe haven, and a town will contain these facilities as well as class trainers, shops, traders, and so on. A city will contain all of these things plus banks, ports, and an auction house. The auction house is where it gets really interesting because the auction houses in WoW are powered by the same fundamental principles of supply and demand that power real-world stock markets that power, more importantly, the real-world markets that occur in real-world market squares. Because regardless of whether you're trading exotic seahorse mounts, enchanted two-handed axes or coffee beans, the underlying principles of exchange are identical and therefore the skills are transferable. Now, people who know me in the flesh might be astonished to find that I find the stock market interesting, and I'd like to assure them that I haven't suddenly become a rabid capitalist. My interest here is in the model of a stock market and what difference it makes to a game, because the difference it makes is the introduction of collaborations and power shifts which occur in a safe environment. This transforms WoW from a smash and bash fantasy game to an astoundingly useful sandbox in which social experiments can be performed safely, but more of that later. For the moment, let's have a look at the big idea. The big idea was to provide schools and colleges access to servers on which digital worlds resided, but instead of a fantasy world, these digital globes could be modelled using real-world topographical information, much like Google Earth. This is a truly massive subject, so we'll start small and return to the example of the fictional school and its accompanying DMV, or deserted medieval village. Initially, the real-world applications might not be obvious, but if you've got the patience to run through to the end, they will start to emerge. The initial build. Before they start, the students will have to do a little research into medieval structures and how many of each type of building their settlement would need. Then they would set about building them in a computer-aided design program, or one of the many in-game editors such as CryEngine, Unreal, and Unity and so on. The libraries of textures and shapes generated during the building phase could be dumped in a warehouse like Google Warehouse, so anyone following on wouldn't have to start from scratch. Building design would be constrained by material availability, just as it was in the medieval period. Window size being dependent on the glass technology of the time, for instance. Anyway, you've built the village, it looks pretty good, but it's actually not going to provide you with much more meaningful data than the paint and canvas reconstruction the artist did for you. So how can you generate meaningful data, and how are your students now going to benefit from their labours? So we move to the generation game. You populate your village. Not with Sims dolls, but your students. In the build phase, your students would have to be generalists, but in the population phase, specialists will emerge, along with specialist research. One of your students, for instance, spots the fact that a mill would be handy, both in terms of what they could offer the village, but also in terms of making themselves strategically significant. But before they can make that idea into reality, they are going to have to study the local geography to see whether a water mill or a windmill would be the best option, and of course research mill designs. They may also have to collaborate to form a collective of people who are willing to donate labour and materials to the project. You will then of course have to work out who gets what in return for their donation. Anyway, you get the idea. To begin with, it would probably be simplest to have more of a building block approach, and when the system starts getting populated, then the finer gradations of divisions of labour could kick in. Farmville, you may remember it, started as a game in Facebook, had over 80 million players at one point. I can see how the simplified, speeded up world of farming could be folded into the digital world I'm describing. People could go off, build a farmstead, supply the local market with foodstuffs. Obviously, other people would have to run the market and so on, but as long as there was a currency in place, then a reward system could be devised to keep essential materials flowing. But now we'll ramp it up. Another class or school in a different country or in the same country has a different village on the same world server. They haven't got the idea of building a mill, but they still need their wheat turning into flour, so deals are done and networks of common interest emerge. As more people pop up, so the population increases, and so the levels of social complexity increase. Other systems will emerge to cope with the increase. Where previously a handful of farmers, smiths and market traders trundled on together, hierarchies within the settlements will form. Guilds, if you will. More networks. To begin with, a period of relative calm should probably be observed so various systems can develop. Then perhaps chaotic elements can be introduced. An extended dry spell so that the crops fail and your character faces the prospect of starvation. What will happen then? What networks will come into play? Perhaps plowshares will be turned into swords to ensure your survival, and if you get through it, then you've just made a leap towards having to maintain a standing army. So where are you going to find the extra metals for the armour and weapons they need, the firewood for the forges, the food to feed them? You don't want to crash your natural resources, otherwise you're finished anyway. Oh, unless you can go and grab somebody else's before they get much bigger. Hang on, did anyone else survive? They did? How big is their army? Fine. So people have a military, borders are defined and farmers go back to farming while the patrols keep feeding information about other patrols back to the leaders or council. And who are they? Were they elected? Or were they just the best people to ensure survival through a period of conflict? Are they then the best people to govern during a period of calm? Will you need elections? Other systems, other networks are emerging already. So things have settled down a little. We've gone from farming to hierarchies via starvation and conflict. It's probably not the only way it happens, but that's how it happened this time. So what happens when someone washes up on some nearby digital shore carrying a plague? You can't fight that off with swords. A plague doesn't give a damn how big the top guy's hat is. If he breathes in at the wrong moment, he's as dead as the next man or woman. This is where you find you weren't as smart as you thought you were as a society. Medicine would probably have been a good move. So the lesson is this: your students prepare themselves for various roles in the real world by sandboxing entire existences and social systems in a digital world which, though it may occasionally piss you off by killing you, has no sharp edges as such. You can teach them about economics while they're practicing economics. You can teach them about the principles of business and let them run their own scenarios. You don't have to teach them the value of a trade. They'll know about it already. In fact, the way things are going with digital environments, the more adept players will probably be earning more than their teachers. Digital worlds have been overflowing into the material world for quite some time. Back in 2006, a chap called Stephen Gillett applied for a position as a senior manager in engineering at Yahoo. He had the usual collection of qualifications that allowed him to gain a strong position in the interview process, but as the conversation flowed, it emerged that he was a master in one of the top guilds in the world of Warcraft. One of his interviewers played the game and was aware of the guild and its reputation and was impressed by the fact that all the qualities you needed to successfully run a thriving WoW guild, networking, organisation and focused group activities, were precisely the same qualities that they desired for the position in the company. He was offered the job and took it. But the point is this: all interviewees, to a greater or lesser extent, would probably have been capable of doing the job, and it was a matter of luck that his position as a guild master in WoW came up. However, it was this that tipped the balance in his favour. Secondly, there's a small matter of leverage to be considered. You scratch my back and I'll scratch yours element. Certainly Mr. Gillett wanted the position at Yahoo, but how much did the interviewer desire a position in the guild that Mr. Gillett ran? Another example from the world of Warcraft is the corrupted blood incident. This was born from a simple but highly infectious debuff that briefly drained your high-level character's health and was, by all accounts, a relatively mild attack that was supposed to be confined to a particular area. However, through a glitch, the player's pets and minions became infected and carried the outbreak into the wilder world, and more importantly, into areas inhabited by lower-level players for whom the infection was fatal. The debuff spread like a plague and created a great deal of confusion, panic and general running away from major centres of population. The programmers attempted to enforce quarantines, but the infection was only curtailed through a series of patches and took about a week to control. The way it was transmitted and the reactions of the players so mirrored the way a real disease spreads that a group of scientists at various research centres used it as a model for research. One researcher, a Tufts University professor named Nina Pfefferman, was so taken with the parallels between the digital and material worlds that she grew keen on the idea of creating and introducing new diseases specifically for the purpose of studying not only how the infections were spread but the reactions of the players to the event, something which had previously been lacking in pure number simulations. The following year, Blizzard, the maker of the game, introduced a zombie plague as part of the publicity for the launch of the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. It's unknown if this was part of such an experimental digital disease program as suggested by Pfefferman, a complete coincidence, or simply that one event inspired the other and Pfefferman had no influence on the decision at all. It would be extremely interesting to find out. As broadband and cheap processing power become more ubiquitous and more games follow the free-to-play model and are disseminated through popular networks such as Steam, the flow of experience from digital worlds to the material world is only going to get stronger and stronger, and I'll be revisiting this subject again in the not too distant future. In the meantime, if you're a parent and your children want to play, then I should let them. You're doing them a favour and one day they may well thank you for it. Well, thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this, then please feel free to subscribe to the channel either by clicking the button below or the link that should appear about now. As usual, all the links and resources referred to in this video will be available in the description box below and at the transcript page at the main Digital Digging website. Right, well, cheerio chaps, and hope to see you next time. Bye bye.